Welcome to 2016 and the first review of the new year. I have some new equipment, I have some new drive, and I have a lot of new ideas to help entertain you guys. But before I get into all that, I wanted to start this off by saying something controversial. Now, I know what I'm getting into when I'm saying this, and I know I'm going to make some people angry, but I've had some time to think about it, and I'm going to say it anyway. Cheetahmen 2 really isn't that bad. Now, I know what you're thinking. What in the world is wrong with you? Of course Cheetahmen 2 is bad. I mean, look at all the stuff that's been said about it. And I get it. Look, I didn't say that it was a good game. I just said that the game wasn't all that bad. Before we start dissecting all this stuff, let's get into the story. Wait a minute. Did the music just lose its percussion? We're off to a really great start, aren't we? Cheetahmen 2's story is very simple and very 90s. The series' antagonist, Dr. Morbus, has created a new type of subhuman, the Ape Man. He plans to use this Ape Man to go after his original creations from the first game, the Cheetahmen. You, playing as all three of them, must defeat everything in your path to save the world from this whole debacle. It's very clear that this game, along with the original Cheetahmen game on the Action 52 cartridge, were designed to take advantage of that anthropomorphic creature team craze that was going on during the 90s. You know, stuff like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Street Sharks, Biker Mice from Mars, stuff that Rob Paulson's been in, I don't know. Anyway, what I'm reviewing today is actually the Lost Levels version, which I actually helped kickstart a while back. And through this, I got a comic that explains the origin of this whole thing. Yeah, it's not that good. But that's just the start of this whole mess. Glitches galore, programming issues, and many other things festoon this entire game. Just walk through one level and see what you run into. Recolored tiles. Characters not actually on platforms. Walking through walls and floors. Hit detection boxes not working at all. And hit detection boxes working a bit too well. Of course, we can't forget that the levels aren't really designed well. Aside from the glitches, the design is usually flat, with some occasional platform jumping. However, this doesn't help that the enemies behave differently from level to level, and this seems to be due to the way the levels were coded. For instance, if you accidentally get hit by an enemy in level 2, this completely changes the enemy pattern layout for the next several screens. And then there's the fact that every 2 levels you change characters, which means you now have to get used to new mechanics. This isn't so bad when you're going from level 4 to level 5. Well, that is if you have a copy of the game that actually allows that. But levels 1 and 2 have you control a character with a crossbow, which plays completely different than the other 2 characters. And let's not even get started on the music. It's so bland and yet it's so jarring at the same time. And there's no other extra level music, so you get this particular piece for all 6, or in some cases all 4, levels of the game. In fact, you've probably heard this music a bit too much already, since there are only 2 musical tracks to speak of. So from this point onward, I'm actually going to use music from games that were actually good. which means the list of credits I'm going to have to make is going to be a lot longer than originally intended. The biggest problem with this game was that it wasn't finished, at least at the time. The game was actually incomplete in its original release, with stages 3 and 4 being labeled as Stage 3. You also couldn't access the intended 5th or 6th stages at all, which is actually where the version I'm playing of this game starts to improve. I know, that sounds weird, right? It's like somebody decided to say, hey, let's go back and fix some of this stuff 20 years later. The 5th and 6th levels show that there was some intended creativity beyond sky blue backgrounds and flat platforms. Don't get me wrong, it's still very static and boring, but it's much better than the other stages were. We also start seeing things that make a bit more sense. Enemies and projectiles like fire arrows and axes make a bit more sense than the little, I guess those things are UFOs and creepy beetles running around. And a bit about the controls. It's true they aren't standardized controls. We're definitely used to A being jump and B being attack. But there's nothing in the rules that states that has to be the standard for all 2D platformer action games. Does anybody remember Russian Attack? That jump button was up on the D-pad. All we get here is a reversal of button pressing, which is something the player just needs to get used to, just like any other control scheme on any other controller. In fact, like any other game, there's a learning curve. Did anybody beat Super Mario Bros. In their first try? Most likely not, as some teenagers on YouTube can show you today. Without any real prior experience, you really have no idea what you're doing. It's the same concept here. The player must learn the rules of the game and figure out what to do in the world to make it to the end. Yes, there are points where the patterns change, but even that can be overcome. So, why would I say such good things about a game that doesn't necessarily deserve it? Well, I'm going to respond with this. You're going to see a whole bunch of games down here that echo throughout time, from one particular game company, in fact. Games like, Castlevania. I'll show you Contra next. Here's Jackal. Here's Life Force. These are games that roll off the tip of my tongue and come from a company that didn't realize they would make pachinko machines 30 years later. But then they also made this. This is the original Top Gun, a game that people often hated, particularly for the scene where you have to land in the aircraft carrier. Konami should have known better than to make a game like that. I mean, even the sequel didn't do all that well. I propose that Active Enterprises, the guys that made this and Action 52, didn't. Most companies usually get manuals and development kits. Software companies like Tengen, who were actually licensed at one point, actually got better over time, even when they were unlicensed. Other unlicensed companies like Color Dreams, which would make the Wisdom Tree NES games, still got better over time with further releases. Well, to a degree. Action 52 had to make room for all those games on the cartridge, and Cheetahmen 2 didn't even improve with the extra free space. So I guess we're dealing with a game where the developer didn't quite know what they were doing? Anyway, I know we're dealing with the Lost Levels version, but I did want to take into account the original as well. But no matter the version, the question is still the same. Is Cheetahmen 2 worth your cash? I spent $60 helping to kickstart this game, and well, it's not worth the $60 I spent. However, the pricing gets worse from there. You're looking at triple digits for a signed copy that I saw on eBay, and the original cartridge? That's even worse. Unless you're a big collector with lots of money and time to track down a copy of this game, I'd honestly suggest you save your cash for something else. It's not worth hundreds of dollars, let alone 60, 40, 20, or even $10. However, I will apply virtual console pricing to this and say that $5 is probably the most I would spend on it, and it had better be the complete Lost Levels version. I mean, at least you get to go through all 6 stages before the game deposits you back to the black screen. Cheetahmen 2 isn't so much a game as it is a novelty, a product of a bygone era when Nintendo tightly controlled what kind of games came out on their system, and when smaller developers tried desperately to get onto the Nintendo. Active Enterprises tried their hardest despite not having any direction whatsoever, and still managed to make something that kinda sorta worked. It's not bad, especially considering what we got. Now, I'm glad it got a revival through Kickstarter, but this isn't something I would do all the time. Besides, I think you know the reason why I spent $60.